a very distinguished guest and who has joined with us. More precisely, I will take the name is Professor Surinder at Jodhka. His work has changed how we understand the caste, and he has shown us that caste is not just a part of the history but a living reality. And he is deeply understand the caste with the economy and the how this caste is actually percolating within the state institution. We are also very delighted to welcome Professor Murzaban Zal. Through his work in the philosophy and critical theory, he encourages us to look again at a big question about the society, about the knowledge, about the social justice, and always through the lenses of thinkers like Marx and the Ambedkar. We are very fortunate to have with us a Professor Jyoti Chandramani, whose leadership in economic and public policy highlighted how important it is to put inclusive growth and development at the center of our national conversations. When we try to reflect on the caste and in the state policy, we are really asking what role does the state play in shaping, challenging, and maybe even supporting the caste in our society. Has the state always been an instrument of social change, or has it sometimes perhaps unintentionally helped to keep old inequalities alive? These are not just the academic questions, but these are the questions about our daily lives, all about our democracy and our future as a society. In this regard, when we are talking about Dr. Ambedkar Chair, I really wanted to reflect some of these idea which he has given about the caste and the policy. According to him, we believe that the state must be honored than just a manager of the law or and order. For him, the state was the most important tool we have for creating the justice and equality. When Ambedkar actually wrote the constitution, he built up protections and promises meant to uplift those who had been left behind for the generation. Dr. Ambedkar's perspective on the caste and the state policy emphasize the need for the structural transformation and robust government intervention to dismantle the caste-based discrimination. He argued that caste system is a fundamentally undemocratic and must be abolished for the genuine social reform and national unity. He insisted that liberty, equality, and fraternity are essential democratic values that must underpin all policies of the state. He warned that without social democracy, political democracy cannot survive, stressing that the state must actively work to remove the caste barriers and promote equal rights for the all citizen. He further stated that the political representation is vital for the upliftment of the marginalized community, particularly the SC/STs and the OBCs. Ambedkar advocated this particular aspect in the legislature and the public services, recognized that proper representation is a key to protecting the minority interest and effecting the meaningful change. So he identified that the economic dependence is a tool to enabling the caste operations. He called for the state led land distribution and nationalization of agriculture to the free Dalits from the economic bondage and promoting their social and economic independence. But the caste has proved to be a deeply resilient policies meant to reduce inequalities sometimes fall short, or they created a new complications. Caste appears sometimes unexpectedly in the economic decisions, in the way elections are fought, and in the delivery of the public services. So we actually begin today. Let us keep in mind that talking about a caste and state policy means thinking about progress and the setbacks. It means celebrating what has changed, being honest about what still need to be changed. Ambedkar once reminded us that liberty, equality, and fraternity cannot survive alone. They must exist together, supporting one another. So let us, make this day as a space where we can think together and question together, imagine the bold new answers, always with the Ambedkar vision guiding us forward. So I really thank you. I invite you all all of you to join us in this thoughtful and open discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir, for eloquently setting the stage for today's event. Now I request Professor Ajay Choudhary, sir, to facilitate our esteemed uh, guest speaker, Professor Surinder Jodhka, sir. एक. Chair of the lecture, Professor Murzaban Jal, sir. Co-organizer and guest of the honor, Professor Jyoti Chandiramani, ma'am. I am deeply honored to introduce our esteemed guests to you. Guest speaker, Professor Surinder Jodhka, sir, is a professor of sociology at the Center for Study of Social Systems, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. His areas of expertise include social inequality, caste, and contemporary India, rural society, agrarian change, and development studies. He has authored and edited over 20 books, including The Indian Village, Rural Lives in the 21st Century, 2023, and Caste in Contemporary India. Professor Jodhka sir is the recipient of several prestigious awards, such as the Malcolm Odysseus Award 2024 and the ICSR Amartya Sen Award 2012. He has held visiting positions at Oxford University, Wake Forest University, and the University of London, among others. Widely published with more than 120 research papers and book chapters, he serves on multiple editorial boards and advisory committees. His research and writings continue to shape contemporary debates on caste, inequality, and rural transformation in India. Now, the chair of the lecture is Professor Murjaban Jal, was a professor and director at the Center for Educational Studies, Indian Institute of Education, Pune. He did his PhD from the Department of Philosophy, Punjab University, on Marx's theory of fetishism and consequently worked at the Center for Civilization, New Delhi. He was a fellow at the Indian Institute of Advanced Studies, Shimla, and the ICSR Senior Fellow, where he worked on the ethnography of the making of minority community in India. He is the author of the selection of Karl Marx 2010, Zoroastrianism from Antiquity to the Modern Period 2012, The New Militants 2014, Why We Are Not Hindus 2015, What Allies the Indian Muslim 2016, and the colleges and the challenges for the Indian left 2016. He is presently concluding his books Marxism and Science and the Importance of Being Enlightened. He has also published more than 80 research papers in national and international journals. Our co-organizer and guest of honor, Professor Jyoti Chandiramani ma'am, is the Dean of the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences and the Director of the Symbiosis School of Economics at Symbiosis University. She has heads the Symbiosis Center for Urban Studies. Professor Chandiramani ma'am was a member of the Forum for Development Cooperation and the Steering Committee for University Connect for G20. She has been invited by Macquarie University as short-term fellow and Niti Aayog as a member of the working group on city governance and smart cities. She was invited to the 5th ASEM Rectors Conference as a mentor for the Students' Forum organized by Charles University and the Asian Europe Foundation in Prague. Professor Chandiramani ma'am was appointed as a member of the Fourth Estate of Manipur University as invited as part of the Indian delegation to Pakistan for the 10th South Asian Economic Students Meet at the Lahore University at Management Sciences. In 2015, Professor Jyoti Ma'am was conferred with the ICOGO Institute called last. Okay. Now I invite guest of honor, Professor Jyoti Chandiramani ma'am, to kindly share her views with us.
Very warm good morning to our chief speaker for today, Professor Surinder ji, Professor Jal. I think we have two very strong dignitaries over here who will be delivering lectures that we are really going to be privileged to hear. I welcome you as the Dean of the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences of Symbiosis International University. As Himangi rightly said, that Symbiosis Center for Ambedkar Studies, which got set up in 23, was the first center of a private university, and we are privileged that Symbiosis got it. I'm happy to say that I actually sat to write that proposal which went to the government. And, that's why today I think, we have this little genesis. In 2011, I was asked to write a vision for the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences. And at that point of time, I said, okay, what is going to be my vision? At that time, there was only Symbiosis School of Economics and then Symbiosis School for Liberal Arts. And Surinder sir, at that point, I looked at two institutions in social sciences which were excelling in India, undoubtedly JNU and TIS. And as I went deeper and deeper, I said, before we even talk about global, let's talk about national. And I'm so happy to share this platform with you today, because at that point of time, I said, I hope the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences comes very close to the depth and width of what is happening at JNU. So over the years, we now have 4 schools: the School of Economics, the School for Liberal Arts, the School for International Studies, and the Statistical Symbiosis Statistical Institution. We've had 4 centers. The Ambedkar Center is here where you are, as well as the Symbiosis Center for Urban Studies, Symbiosis Center for Climate Change. And we used to have the Education Center here, the Higher Education and Research Center, under the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences. But as Symbiosis ranks number 24 in the NIRF ranking, and we aspire to grow better, I don't know in ranking, if at all, but definitely in quality and our endeavors, so therefore a separate faculty of education was set up. I thought it's very important for us to share this with you because you can contextualize, your being here today. And we've recently got awarded the Rotary Peace Center, and the first in Asia. Whether it's the Peace Center, the Climate Change Center, Symbiosis Center for Urban Studies, or the Ambedkar Center, everywhere inequalities is definitely touched upon. With nearly 2,000 students at the present junction under the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences, we have also more than 70 full-time faculty. And besides 70 full-time faculty, we have 130 plus PhD scholars and almost 90 plus PhD guides from various faculty who are there. So shaping up, if we had to divide the Symbiosis International University into 2 segments of HAS and STEM, as we call it, Humanities and Social Sciences, and Science, Technology, Engineering, and Medicine, then I would say that the Symbiosis HAS is probably one of the biggest in the country, because we have very reputed law college, as you rightly said. You've heard about our law college. We have a very well-ranked media. Our MBAs are doing brilliantly across number of venues that we have. We have campuses in Nagpur, Nasik, Noida, Hyderabad, and now in Dubai too. So given this is the background about the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences, where you have come. So a very, very warm welcome to you, and I hope we are going to be privileged in hearing you. It is both a privilege and an honor to welcome all of you here to the Ambedkar Memorial Lecture, organized by Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences, along with Ajay and Hemangi from the Ambedkar Chair. It is a moment of reflection, dialogue, and reaffirmation of our collective commitment to justice, equality, and human dignity. While we very often think that we've become modern in our thoughts and caste system has moved away, it somehow features in its underlying way in the manner in which it shapes up, be it during election times or in other forums and forums. Having to hear Professor Surinder Jodhka today will be probably a great honor to hear an eminent sociologist whose scholarship and and has profoundly illuminated the complex ways in which caste continues to shape the state, the polity, and our democratic life. As rightly pointed out by Ajay ji, social democracy and political democracy really have to work together if you really want the freedom that you're looking for. Sir's work has profoundly shaped contemporary debates on caste, inequality, and democracy. His scholarship compels us to revisit the very questions that Dr. Ambedkar raised with such clarity and courage. Dr. Ambedkar once said, political democracy cannot last unless there lies at the base of it social democracy. What does social democracy mean? It means a way of life which recognizes liberty, equality, and fraternity in the principles. As I was talking to you, before we started this talk, we said that the new caste system, education is the new caste system. It leads to a new kind of stratification. So very often you hear, IIT, IIM graduates, then I hear my house help very often saying, "Okay, my granddaughter, madam, international school mein jate hain." I mean, their aspirations, I can understand. International school, English speaking school, the choice of a private school, private versus public, and how education system has become the new caste system and has got stratified in its own way. As economists, we study markets from perfect competition to monopoly and monopolistic competition. While it's good that there is a option for many with different types of institutions, but it does create its own inequality, and that becomes a challenge on how to deal with it. I think I would be more eager to hear what you have to say and leave this ground for you to lay the context. Thank you so much.
Thank you, ma'am, for your thoughtful and encouraging words. I request Professor Ajay Choudhary, sir, to kindly present a bouquet as a token of gratitude to ma'am. After, yeah. I now invite the guest speaker of the program, Professor Surinder Jodhka, sir, to address the gathering.
Pardon? Yeah. This. हाँ. इसी पे क्लिक करो तो हो जाएगा सब. ये है ना. अच्छा, ये वीडियो है. ओके. हाँ. ये वाला. वॉल्यूम में समझ. Thank you, Himangi. Thank you, Jyoti ji. Thank you, Ajay, for inviting me. Thank you, Professor Jal, for being here. So, ought to call Marzi, Professor Jal. Yeah, and thank you very much, all of you, for kind of coming here. And of course, you have come here with your mobile phones. And mobile phones are actually far more entertaining and interesting than listening to somebody speak on things like caste and state policy, which is so boring, isn't it? Huh? No? I'm asking these girls sitting with their mobile phones, huh? How much boring do you find? What is more boring, caste or policy? Huh? Okay, I have a request, or kind of, yeah, request is the right word. If possible, put your mobile phones in your pocket for half an hour. I won't bore you for very long. And I might end up saying something which might be of some use or some interest to you as well. So yeah, I'll be very grateful if you could raise your hand and say that you're talking nonsense, right? And then also, yeah, also explain to me. But you can say that only if your mobiles are not on and you're not looking at your mobile phones. Then I would say, no, you're looking at mobile phone. This is not what I was saying. So just for half an hour, I won't speak for very long. So it's a kind of slight challenge for me to, at some level, make it a little more complicated so that you people can also find it interesting. It's easier for us to speak through a kind of, PowerPoint and talk about things that we have been talking about for last 20 years, 30 years, and just put it in some language which looks very profound, but actually doesn't mean much. So, and I have this disability. If I have people sitting in front of me looking at their mobile phone, my brain stops working. I've spoken to some doctors. They say, no, there is no treatment for this. So, the only thing I can do is to try to beg for some kind of, indifference to mobile phone from my audience. You don't need to listen to me, but please don't look at your mobile phones when we are here for next half an hour. After that, you can do when others are speaking. I don't mind. They'll have. Okay, yeah, I mean these are interesting words and boring words at some level, but I will try to explain these to you. I mean, first of all, we are talking about caste. All of us have, I can give you a whole lecture on caste. I have written like half a dozen books on caste. And if you are interested in caste, there is a short introduction that I wrote on caste in 2012. It was published by Oxford University Press. It's called Caste, Oxford India Short Introduction. It will give you some kind of academic introduction to caste. It might again be very boring. If you still insist on, can you please not look at your mobile phone for some time? If you feel very compelled, you can leave the room. I mean, I will not complain to Ajay that I didn't have audience, right? So there are also some videos I have on YouTube, again, not very boring in my understanding. So you can look at them as well if you want to kind of get a take on my take on caste. State policy, I mean, again, this is something that I will explain as we go along. Question of ascription, identities, democratic politics, this again I will explain. These are words which all of us at some level use, but they have specific meaning in social sciences. Now that you are doing liberal studies, you are in this room, you are in this university, it is useful to know these words because they help you sometime also in interviews, but also more importantly in our own everyday life. When we talk to each other, when we look at somebody, when somebody is looking at us, all of us have experience of being slighted, right? All of us have experience of feeling humiliated. Even a small child when she is not able to speak, screams or cries when you ignore the child, right? So these are kind of realities of everyday life. They are not something out there happening in South Delhi or in North Block or in Parliament or in State Assembly in Bombay or in some bureaucratic office in Pune. They happen to us all the time. And they were using a different language. For example, there was this interesting person called B.R. Ambedkar. You might have heard his name. Otherwise, you have a person sitting here who has written a book, one of the most interesting books on Ambedkar's life. And Ambedkar was somebody like us who was actually a very, very bright student, very good student who did 2 PhDs. Not 1 PhD, 2 PhDs, and both of them in economics and from top institutes in the world, Columbia and London School of Economics. And at a time when most nationalists that we talk about, they just came back after doing law. Ambedkar also did a law degree, but he didn't enroll for law degree full time. He just used to go in the evening, attend some classes, and in the process he also earned a law degree, and you know about Ambedkar practicing law. So he had a PhD in economics, he had PhD in economics. It was called something else, I think, but it was basically PhD in economics. And then he also had a degree in law from London. So, and it's what I'm going to speak, and what we are talking today in Ambedkar Chair is related to what Ambedkar was trying to say. So democratic politics, again, we talk about democracy or democratic politics, again, question of elections, power, ministers, chief ministers, prime ministers, and we hear these news occasionally, something is happening, the government might change, or there is, election commission not doing their work properly, or those kinds of things. That obviously is politics. But when we're talking about democratic politics, it is also what we call as democratic imagination. What do we mean by democratic imagination? That we should be able to think about each other as if the other person was equal to me. Right? We are not equal. Right? We can't be equal. Equality is not possible in this world. Inequality is inevitable in some sense. But that inequality can also be grounded on some conception of equality. Right? All of us, for example, in our classroom or at home, we are equal. If your parents, you feel that your sibling is being pampered, you scream, you say, no, no. Right? There is some culture of equality, and they can't say that, no, he is a boy and therefore he deserves more food. And the girls will throw that plate on that boy and walk out. And all of you are now citizens. That's what is meant to be citizen. And the idea of democratic imagination is to be able to have a country where all of us, to begin with, think of us as individual and citizen. So it is in that context the idea of ascription becomes very, very critical. When I'm using the word ascription, I'm not using it out of context. That all of us grow up with certain kind of identities, right? I have many identities. Each one of you have an identity. I was introduced as a professor of sociology. That's one identity. The moment you see me with turban, you also have a notion of another identity of mine. I must be a Punjabi. I am a Sikh. That is written on my face, on the way I dress up myself. There are many other identities. I'm also a man, right? I'm an older man, right? These are also identities. So these are identities that I haven't done much to get except for professorship, right? I was born in a Sikh family, so I became a Sikh. I was born as a male, so I became a man. I've grown up in age, so I've become old, right? All these are identities of ascription, right? These are identities that we are born into. Like man and women are identities of ascription. But these identities of ascription are not insignificant. They tend to decide who is going to get priority. They tend to decide who has superior position in society. They get to decide also who will get employment, who will not get employment, not necessarily your qualification, right? So these are identities of ascription against the identities that we work hard to achieve, right? So we kind of have a binary of the other of ascription that is called achievement, right? When I'm introduced as professor of sociology, I wasn't born in a family of a sociologist. I wasn't born to be a sociologist, right? I grew up, I worked, I chose to do MA sociology long time back in this city actually. Then I went on to do my PhD. I published, I worked hard, I have books. So I became a professor. And I also taught other people. Ajay happened to be one of them. So he thought I should get my professor to speak here. So that is a bit of ascription. But there is something that I've achieved. That's how I become a professor. That's how a medical doctor becomes a doctor. That's how you would become engineers or managers or carpenters or shopkeepers. So these are identities that we acquire through our own individual personal hard work. So this becomes very critical when we talk about democratic politics. right? Because we are a society where caste is very central, right? And that's why we are talking about state policy today, right? That if caste is so central and India suddenly in 1947 became a nation state. You have heard this word before? That India is a country, all of us are Indians here. Is there anyone who is not an Indian here? All of us are Indians. If we have to get a passport, which passport can we get? Only Indian passport. India has very clear policy that you can have only one passport. There are some countries which allow you to have two passports, multiple passports also, right? So we are all Indians. Whether you say that I'm anti-national, I hate being nationalist, but when it comes to traveling abroad, you will have to carry that document. You'll have to apply and you have to be an Indian and only Indian, right? Now this passport, if you were to look at the history of passports, when did people begin to require passports to travel? Doesn't even have, yeah? Yeah. So the point I'm trying to make is that before 1947, was there anything called Indian passport? The fact is no. Right? There was no Indian passport. There was no India. Right? We talk about India as a country, as a nation state, as if it has existed forever. And we are not the only ones. Jawaharlal Nehru, who became Prime Minister of India, he also said this India has been in existence since the time of at least Ashoka. Well, he's right, but not really, right? If you were to ask him to draw a map of India, well, he will. There was no cartography until very recently. People had some notions of spatial boundaries or regions, but they were kind of in correspondence with the land mass. You know, there is sea, and after that there is this Indian subcontinent, now we call it. But there was this notion called India. Not that India is new. This region existed. People came from other places, like when Columbus was trying to come to India. You heard about all that history. So nations have, the regions have existed, but in 1947, a very major revolutionary change happens in South Asia. It was also very brutal, very violent, right? Your dean and I, our families lived in other side of the newly drawn international border, and we were forced to leave that place because that became Pakistan, right? For our family, it was a moment of loss. It was a moment when many of our relatives were killed. My mother lost her father. He was killed, right, in partition violence. We were also saved by many Muslims there, and that's how my immediate family could survive. And we came here, right? So Pakistan became a nation state. India became a nation state. It is only in 1947 that India becomes a nation state, right? What is the qualifying feature of nation state? When we are talking about nation state, yeah, somebody was saying? Yeah, that is geographical boundary. Yeah. Yeah, sovereignty, yeah. Pardon? Yes. Most important thing about when we are talking about nation state, we have Professor Marzban Jal, who is writing a book on the value of being enlightened. Now, the word enlightened has a specific history, right? And that history is very, very critical, right? That history is the history of 18th, 19th century Europe, where this being enlightened is understood in a very different manner. Buddha was an enlightened person, right? Ashoka was an enlightened ruler. He became an enlightened ruler. We have had lots of enlightened people in the history of this subcontinent, going back to Vedic period. People who were writing Vedas, they were obviously very enlightened people, right? They could argue, they could write. You have Jain religion coming up. You have these people also arguing with each other, giving lectures to each other, telling each other. We have this whole system of imagining about others and thinking about society and what is good, what is wrong, what is right. People in Kabir Das is writing very enlightened poetry, right? You've heard of Kabir Das? We also sing Kabir's poetry. Young people like Kabir's poetry. And there are lots of people who have done PhDs on Kabir. Kabir never went to a school. Our university did not exist. Neither Symbiosis, nor Pune University, nor JNU. Right? But there is a particular way in which the word enlightenment becomes a very central category, and this is linked to what I'm talking about, right? So it is with the emergence of what we call as modern times, right? Modern times are very specific moments in European history where human beings begin to think about themselves and think about others very differently, right? It is the first time that there is a process of what we call as individualization, that I am a complete unit in myself. And what makes me that complete unit? It is my ability to reason. I would be the rational subject. And we talk about, you ever heard about capitalism? All of us are consumers, all of you have mobile phones, right? And I'm sure most of you would have had long conversations, long fights with your parents that I want only this brand of mobile phone, right? Most of you have some identity of mobile phone. Those of you who have Apple, they kind of carry out that Apple without eating it, right? With a lot of pride, right? That is also our identity of becoming a consumer, right? So the whole foundation of modern times, which also becomes capitalism at some level, which also becomes nation state eventually, right? We have a different ways of coming together. Earlier, we lived with our kin group in our communities, and those communities were very hierarchical. Now, hierarchy is another word that I'm introducing here. Most of you would have heard about it. Hierarchy is a structure of inequality which is pre-decided for you. You don't have a choice. You are born in the family of a cobbler, therefore you are known by your caste name as being cobbler, right? So there is a hierarchical structure. You might be a doctor, but people will introduce you, yeah, he is a cobbler's son. They would use those identities also which are locally known with a very kind of derogatory value, very weak value, very low value, right? Those are hierarchies of ascription. So what modernity does is that it makes it possible for human beings to think about each other as equal, that everyone is equal irrespective of their ascription, irrespective of the family they are born into, and that's the value of nation state. When we are talking about nation state, historically, it's a very, very important radical moment, because it is in the context of nation state that you have possibility of becoming modern person. And that modern person is protected by constitution, right? So nation states are not only new kind of political geographies. Nation states are also new kind of societies, or they promise to be new kind of societies. That's why constitutional democracy, right? That constitutional democracy, the starting of it is in American Revolution. And after that, it's only in the middle of 20th century, the entire world becomes organized around this thing called nation states. And then nation states become a kind of liberal structures. You talk about liberal studies. Liberal studies means what? Liberal studies means that everyone has the liberty. You know, nation state is not a state of power. It is a state of agreement. It's a state of contract, that I'll pay you taxes. In return, you will make sure that I'm safe. I'll pay you taxes. In return, you'll say that there is transport and infrastructure in my city. I'll pay you taxes. In return, you will organize many affairs which I can't do, but I know they are required. As a country, we need to have some kind of defense system. As a country, we also need to have global presence and stuff like that. In many countries, they also provide free education, free healthcare. They are supposed to provide to everyone. In India also, but we have become privatized, and that is what Professor Jyoti was trying to tell you, how we have new kind of caste system in education. That's a separate thing. So my presentation today is about this promise. Our promise of making India into a nation state. Nation state doesn't simply become a country because you are all nationalists. Nationalism is an ideological commitment which actually stops us from asking questions, right? All ideologies have this problem. So how has Indian state dealt with question of caste, right? So when we are talking about caste, right, caste has very significant implications for citizenship, right? That's why Ambedkar is so big. Ambedkar was somebody who helped in writing the constitution. He was the visionary. He was the one who understood this question very well, because he came from a background where identity meant denial. The moment you say, I am a Mahar, you will not be allowed to enter certain areas. You will not be allowed to take water for drinking, right? The moment you say Mahar at a railway station, nobody will be willing to take you to your destination, even if you are willing to pay 3 times the fare, right? The moment you say Mahar, you will not be given a house. Ambedkar came back from his after education. He had signed a bond with the Maharaja of Baroda, and he came back, and the deal was that the Maharaja of Baroda will give him fellowship, and after he comes back, he will have to work for Maharaja. So he comes back and he gets a job, because Maharaja had actually asked him that you have to work. He's a very capable person. And when he moves to Baroda, he obviously has to find a place to stay. He has many contacts, many friends. And he spends there 3 months, 2 months, I don't know exact months. There's a small book called Waiting for Visa, which all of you must read. It doesn't take very long to read that book. And he describes his struggle to find a house. He has friends who would invite him home, will even give him lunch. And then the moment he raised the question of finding him a house, they will begin to look on the other side, sorry, I can't really help you, right? Simply because he's known as Mahar. In Gujarat, he's not even a local Dalit. And finally, he gets place in a place of Parsis. Now, Parsis, Marzban Jal is a Parsi. They are not Hindus. They are not supposed to have caste system. And he gets in the Parsi Dharamshala. And after a few weeks, the Parsi association members get to know that there is a Mahar staying in Dharamshala. They come in a group to kill him, to beat him up. How dare! And he somehow manages with the manager, and the deal was that you will come late and go out in the morning. So Parsis don't have caste system, but Parsis also don't want a Mahar to live there. So he literally runs from there, picks up his bag and baggage and comes to the railway station. He's virtually crying. You can think about how much violence he would have encountered, somebody who was perhaps one of the most educated, if not the most educated person in this place. So caste has implications for citizenship. When we are talking about enlightened nation states ought to be enlightened and they have constitutional democracy. Why do we sing national, what is it called, preamble? All of you would have studied perhaps NCERT books. They open with preamble of the Constitution. It starts by saying, we the people. We are not subjects. We have become the people. We are not ruled over by somebody. We rule over ourselves, for the people, by the people, of the people. You would have heard that famous kind of poem. The point is that this is a democracy, right? We are equal. That is civic equality. So Constitution promises that we will give you civic equality. And this civic equality means everyone is a citizen. Everyone is equal. Everyone has rights. And you can get rights only when you see yourself as equal, not as son of somebody or daughter of somebody, not just as a woman or a man, not as a Dalit or a Rajput or something like that. And this obviously then becomes a challenge for constitutional democracy, that how do you institutionalize citizenship? What do you mean by institutionalization? Right? All of you have become students here. Your identities are institutionalized. The moment you see Symbiosis perhaps also has a dress, because most of you are wearing white shirt. Is it true? Do you have a dress? Right? So dress also helps you identify with a particular identity of being a student of Symbiosis, right? Many schools will also have those labels, right? So all of us have identities which are institutionalized, which have become normal, which have become like, if you want to have children, you get married. So for sociologists, marriage is an institution, right? So you normalize things. So in order to normalize citizenship, we have to deal with existing identities, right? Existing identities of caste, existing identities of ethnicity, existing identities of religion. The idea is that as a secular country, as a kind of nation state, as a constitutional democracy, everyone is equal, full stop. No qualification. No other identities matter. Just because you are an Indian citizen, If you have an Indian passport, if you have an Indian identity, it could be in form of Aadhaar, it could be just simply birth certificate that I was born here, you are naturalized citizen, right? So as a citizen, I have rights, right? So when you travel with passport, the moment they put a visa that you are allowed to enter Germany for 23 days, for those 23 days, you are a citizen of Germany, right? A temporary citizen of Germany, you have the right to walk there freely. Nobody can attack you, kill you. It does happen because there is a problem of compatibility of identity with reality. So caste is two things. As I said here, it's a value. I need to explain that a bit. And the other word is caste is a relational structure. It is a relationship. What do I mean by value? What are values? Values are things that you value, right? Relational structures are relationships. Like, for example, most of the girls are sitting on this side and boys are sitting here, right? So this building also has a relational structure. We have chairs kept here and chair kept there. So we are talking about a relational structure where I'm speaking, you are at least pretending to be listening to me, right? So that is our structure of relationship. And these relationships obviously are marked by certain kind of difference, and that difference is also embedded with power, right? Inequalities. So caste is also a relational structure, and caste is also a value. Should we value caste or should we not value caste? The deal is that if you are a constitutional democracy, the promise is that you can have your caste, but that should be in your pocket. You should not wear it on your chest, right? Caste should not be valued. Everyone is equal. Because if I was to value my caste, and if I happen to be a Rajput or a Brahmin or a Kshatriya or something, that means I'm devaluing your identity, right? So caste should not be valued in public sphere. That's why we are not allowed to, or we should not be allowed to have caste identity matter when we are doing admissions in universities and colleges and schools. So it is in this context that it becomes a very critical point for state to engage with the realities of caste as a policy thing, right? So now India, as I told you, in 1947, India becomes a country, becomes a nation state, right? Now, there were nation states in the West earlier, and there are other nation states in the world. India called itself as a developmental state. But why do we call ourselves as a developmental state? As people like Mazban will tell you, that after capitalism, state emerges as an agency of the rich people. It is only to help them do business that you have the state system. It would protect them. It would protect everyone, but it is primarily protecting the private business, and it would have no business in doing business, right? Business has to be done by private capital. Its only task is to make sure that there is no attack from outside. There is, police services working effectively. And if there are some people who are trying to do revolution or trying to do crime, they should put them behind bars so that the system works well. In case of India, we were also a country which was plundered for 2 centuries by the colonial rule. We were a real bad economy, right? People were in millions dying every year because they could not find food, right? Think of it as a country which had 80% of its population working on land as agriculturists, could not produce enough food for itself. Right? In Australia, in US, 2 or 3% people work on agriculture and they have surplus food production. We have 80% people working in agriculture in 1950s, 80, 47, and we still could not produce enough food because of the way in which colonial rulers had destroyed Indian economy. So India chose to be a developmental state because there was no private capital there to develop India. So Indian state will have to work in order to. So there was this idea of state policy, developmental planning, right? And developmental planning was meant to achieve economic growth. But at the same time, there was also a responsibility of the state, stated responsibility, the fact that we have constitution, right? Constitution was also introduced in 1950, 26th of August, January, which we celebrate as Republic Day. Republic means what? Republic means everyone becomes a citizen, right? So this citizenship could not just be a kind of, switching over from A to B. It had to be produced. How do you make citizens of people who can't even find food? How do you make citizens in a society which is divided on caste system, where Dalits are not even allowed to walk into the streets of a village in Maharashtra? When they walk into the streets of a village, they had to carry a broom behind them so that there is a broom which is sweeping that street. It was a symbolic violence, right? It was persistent humiliation, so that they would have no courage to stand in front of me and argue with me that this is right or this is wrong. This is how caste was institutionalized, through a culture of humiliation, humiliating violence all the time, right? And that is something which had to be broken, right? So the question of citizenship was not simply a matter of economic growth, it was also a kind of producing a new kind of coming together. When we say nation state, we imagine ourselves as being citizens of India. If we were to meet somewhere in a small town of, say, Kenya, and we'll recognize each other instantly. Oh, are you an Indian? Yes, I'm an Indian, right? So I'm also an Indian. So we can talk to each other in a common language. We can talk, even though you might be speaking Marathi and I might be speaking Punjabi, but the moment we identify ourselves as Indians, so there's a new kind of sense of belonging. And this sense of belonging was not there earlier, but now it is there. But that belonging has to have a foundation. That belonging has to have a kind of revolution in the way identities are imagined. And that's where ascription becomes very, very critical. And this should have also been seen as an aspect of what we call as social transformation. When we use the word development, that India should become a developed country, even now our leaders say in 2047, Mission 2047, when India would be a developed country. Or we hear our politicians say that India is the 4th largest global economy. We are all proud of that. But is that enough? Does that also assure that we have social transformation? We don't have indicators of that. And democracy needs, what I was talking about, some kind of imagining of each other as individuals with equal dignity, even if you don't have equal income, even if you don't have equal access to education, but the person who is serving you tea has equal amount of dignity. You can't just get to stand up and humiliate him or her. So that would be violation of her rights. Not only there, capitalism also needs this kind of individual consumers, right? It's not simply a kind of question of social reforms. It is also a requirement for a country to develop on capitalist line. So it's challenge of producing a kind of a culture or a community or a society which is not only not quote unquote backward, which is not only not underdeveloped, but it also gets rid of rigid hierarchies which are mostly hierarchies of ascription, which have been around for a long time. So instead of going into my rest of the slides, since I promised that I will not speak for more than half an hour, it's already half an hour. I don't have any problem. But I don't want these kids to return to their mobile phones. Is it all right? If you say you will not go back to your mobile phone, then I'll speak. Otherwise, I'll wind up in 5 minutes. Is that all right? I'm boring you or not? Okay, I'll try to kind of speak a little more. Yeah. So suddenly, in this year, there have been 2-3 very important developments in India, right? And it is also important for your exams at later stage at some level when you want to write, where caste has come back to what I would call as the policy narratives, right? And these 2 very significant developments have been, one was judgment by the Supreme Court in 2024, which allowed subclassification of scheduled caste. You all know that in order to bring about that transformation, apart from many other things that India did or India did not do, India did institutionalize a policy of reservations, right? All of us, most of us, have problem with reservation in one way or the other. Reservation is not necessarily a good thing, even for the person who is selected in reserved category, because we have already branding them, right? That they are not the meritorious one, which is a very problematic thing, right? So we have this very deadly narrative in our society which contrasts merit with reservation, and that is again, in some sense, those privileges want to stay. It's a complicated question. We can talk about it later. But anyway, we have this reservation policy, and over the past 70 years, reservations have achieved a lot. I would say that India has become a much better country because of reservations. Reservations has enabled the so-called scheduled castes and scheduled tribes develop stakes in the system, right? They are also participating in the economy, they are participating in political system, and they see it as their country, right? Which is very, very critical. Otherwise, if you have people who are marginalized, they can be a threat to that society. So I think reservations have achieved a lot, right? And now there are also internal discussions on reservation. There are contestations both from outside as well as inside. There are problems because there is privatization. Should there be reservation in private sector? These are very important questions, right? India has been debating on these for the past 20 years. I have also participated in it to some extent. Likewise, within scheduled caste is not a caste category. It is an official classification of communities which are in thousands, right? Each state has its own list of castes. So some castes are saying that we are not getting reservation benefits. There are some other castes that are getting more benefits. So Supreme Court gave an order, this was a court case going on, that if the state has enough evidence that there is a bias of benefits in favor of certain caste groups, it can introduce subclassification across caste groups, which I think is a very, very important policy. Likewise, we heard from the Home Minister this year that they are going to enumerate caste again. Not that India doesn't enumerate caste. India enumerates scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, and we have a notion of other backward classes as well, but we don't enumerate everyone. Everyone's identity is not taken in the census. In the coming census, we are told that there would be caste identity, and the moment you have caste identity, it would obviously produce all kinds of implications, right? You can, if you are an economist, you would start making different kind of tables, right? Your correlations, now we have SC/ST one category and general one category. What is general? General also is internally very different caste groups, right? So in Pune, for example, if you have separate numbers for Brahmins, separate numbers for migrant Sindhis, separate number for Parsis, separate numbers for Mahars, separate numbers for Mangs, separate numbers for Marathas, and against that you see level of economic prosperity, development. It could create new kind of politics, right? Which would also be caste politics, which could also be politics of new kind of identity mobilizations. So it's a very problematic thing. And that's the reason why India was not enumerating caste for all these years. Now, for me, I think this opens up a very interesting kind of challenge, right? To begin with my own position, if you want me to ask my position, I think these are both good judgments. These are good developments which compels the state to engage with caste directly and not ignore it. So this is something that I've already discussed with you when I talk about ascription. Ascription has a particular kind of meaning which is opposite of achievement, and most societies have some kind of ascription. It is not only India has ascription. Yesterday we were talking about Gail Omvett's work. So all ascription is also socially constructed. What do I mean by that? That when we say caste system is not a biological system. Caste system is not a kind of inevitable system. Caste system is also not a traditional system. Not that, we were born into this is how we used to be, we are still that. That's not true, right? Caste system is socially and historically constructed, right? Like the difference between men and women, they are biologically different at some level, but the moment we talk about gender, we say they are culturally and historically constructed, right? Likewise, caste is also all the time reimagined, re-envisioned, reconfigured, right? So caste system in Pune today, even among the so-called orthodox people, is the caste system of 21st century, not caste system of Vedic period, not of 5th century. They'll have those identities, but there are many communities which began to be known Brahmins only in 1940s or even in 1980s. Somebody was telling me she is doing a research in UP, and there are these pujaris in Haridwar or somewhere, and they were earlier considered as OBC, but now everyone accepts them as Brahmins, and they also call themselves as Brahmins. So Brahmins also have their own jatis. Every Brahmin is not equal. Right? There are superior Brahmins, there are inferior Brahmins. So they will be accepted as Brahmins because Brahmin politicians want a larger number of Brahmins, but nobody will marry with them. The Chaturvedis and Trivedis will never marry with these new kind of Brahmins. But Brahminness is being reconfigured in a democratic political context because elections begin to matter. Yadav is not a caste. In North India, people talk about Yadav. Yadav is a mobilized category very recently. Likewise, Maratha is a recently mobilized category as Maratha. So, all ascription is socially and culturally constructed, and ascription, as again I have discussed with you, has a very close relationship with modern nation state, and we want to move towards what I call as associational collectives. Associational collectives are different from communitarian collectives, right? Nation state is an associational collective, right? Where we are all together by choice, right? We are not born into it, therefore we are there. Now we are also born into it because nation state also acquires the features of a community, because you can't come into a nation state, and that always remains a matter of contention all over the world. But in principle, nation state should not have any problem with identities, right? Everyone should have right to choose their country, but because the world also has a history, and that history is of development and net development. So these are not ethnic communities, these are associational collectives. We also have this idea of identity politics. What do we mean by identities and identity politics? Is that when we mobilize ascription, it becomes an identity politics. And identity politics then, as I was talking to you about Yadavs or Brahmins or Marathas or Dalits, these are also mobilized identities. Dalit is not a caste category again. Dalit is not an ancient category. Dalit is a category of the late 20th century. It is here that Dalit Panthers Dalits of Bombay began to find comparison between them and the black people in Europe, in Africa or in America. And they thought that we were also like them, proud people, right? Dalit Panthers. Panther, you know what is Panther, right? So we are also like they were Black Panthers, we'll be Dalit Panthers. So this was a kind of new imagination, and which caught on after the 1990s, and many Dalits, not all are still, not that everyone accepts it. So ascription produces a certain kind of politics which on the face of it contradicts the idea of democracy, because it is mobilizing ascription, but it also has value, right? For example, gender politics emerged in Western Europe in the 20th century, and it transformed the way people looked at each other. Earlier, women's subordination was taken for granted, but then identity politics, again, as I said, it doesn't really resonate with our times. So now going back to what I was saying earlier, if you were to look at the visions of India after independence, all of them, Nehru, Ambedkar, and I've also Ambedkar was perhaps the first one who said that, at the time of introduction of Indian Constitution, these lines are very, very critical. One of those lines that Jyoti was also talking about, we are going to enter into a life of contradictions, right? In politics, we'll have recognition of the principle of one man, one vote, one value, right? No caste system, no hierarchy. In our social and economic life, we shall, by reason of our social and economic structure of caste, continue to deny the principle of one man, one value. How long shall we continue to live this life of contradictions? This is the gist of my presentation, actually, right? So I'm trying to argue that there is this contradiction. There's a very foundational contradiction. India cannot become a democracy unless we deal with the reality of everyday life. The reality of everyday life includes caste. And caste is in some sense, but not the only reality. There are other realities elsewhere which produce inequality. You cannot build anything on the foundation of caste. You cannot build up a nation. You cannot build up a morality. Anything you build will or build on the foundation of caste will crack and never be the whole, right? So caste is not something which is compatible with constitutional morality, which is compatible with the idea of nation state and citizenship. Nehru and K.M. Panikar was a very important representative of the emerging middle class. They also see in the context of society today, the caste system and much that goes with it are wholly incompatible, reactionary and restrictive and barriers to progress. There can be no equality in status and opportunity within its framework, nor can there be a political democracy. So underlying these is a recognition, but also a promise not of giving equality to caste groups. The promise both in Ambedkar as well as in Nehru and the middle class is the promise of annihilation. And this is something that again has been marginalized. The word annihilation was popularized by Ambedkar. Annihilation means we will not have the value of caste when we are sitting in this room. As I said earlier, you can carry it in your pocket, you can be very proud of it, but when we come to the public sphere as Indians, as nation state citizens, we will not have that identity. Now, this is a promise, but if you look at the history of India's development planning, most of it has been caste blind, right? So we had this planning commission. If you look at India's 5-year plan, 1951, I think the first plan, and second plan, third plan, the word caste doesn't appear. Right? So the idea is that you will measure poverty on the basis of individual household, who is poor, who is not poor, right? And on that basis, you will think about development. It would be development towards equity, social justice, but there's no reference to caste. So if you look at the past 75 years, there has been significant progress. India has been a kind of vibrant electoral democracy. Again, there are problems with that. And there have been silent and not so silent revolutions of different kinds. And there have been significant elite churning. In 1950s and 1940s, if you look at the people who were India's elite, those who became rulers of India after 1947, nearly all of them came from urban areas. Nearly all of them came from so-called upper castes. Nearly all of them would speak in English language. If you look at the proceedings of Indian Parliament in 1950s, almost everything was in English language. They were all educated in English medium schools. Many of them also went to Britain, came back, and then they kind of, they thought about India very well. But if you look at 1990s or 2020s, the elite has been completely displaced. We can agree, disagree with political formations, but nobody speaks in English in parliament any longer, right? Nobody, state assemblies are very different places, right? At the local level, at the regional level, at the intermediary level, there has been complete transformation of elite groupings. There are all kinds of people. There are lots of people coming from OBCs who have become ruling elites. Many Dalits are also there in every town, every city, every village who would be representatives. So these are revolutionary changes in many ways, right? At the national level, there is still a bit lesser change, but there also you have a prime minister talking about Khan market, mafia, whatever, and elite clubs. So there is an attack. I mean, this also produces a kind of populist politics. That's a separate question. But these are significant churnings in elite. I'm not passing judgment on it. Actually, India has also seen urbanization. The idea was that caste will go away on its own. That's why caste was not touched upon by people like Nehru. Their idea was that development itself is a best palliative to caste. Development will bring urbanization, industrialization, and this means that you will have everyone will be educated. In cities, you have anonymity. You don't know anybody's caste, and you can't judge people. So has India become urban? The answer is yes, right? India's urban is huge. India's urban is just the urban population of India is larger than the total population of any country in the world other than China and, of course, India. So India's urban population is 400 million plus, right? Which is more than the third largest country of the world, that is United States of America. Rural India is also very mobile. No village, it never was, but today if you go to any village, you could mistake it for a small town, right? Almost everything that you can get in the city, you will also get in the village, right? You have refrigerators, you have electricity. Now, many people in Delhi, they are moving to villages because they can work from home. You have, during pandemic, I know I used to talk to my students and take class, and somebody will be sitting in the fields in Bihar, right? So in the fields of Bihar also, you had very good connectivity. They'll say, yeah, idhar connection acha lagta hai sahab. So that's why I'm sitting here in the village. The connectivity is not good. So India's elite has also become very globalized. India's working class is also globally integrated now, and all kinds of these changes have come about both. I mean, again, I don't have time to emphasize on this. There have been pressures from below. There have been policies like reservations, which are pressures from above. But a lot of changes come about from the side. Even when caste was not thought about, Green Revolution, for example, or infrastructure project, or introduction of a university, schools, they produced changes in caste system which were not directly targeted at caste, right? So these are all changes that have happened. But all of us know now. I remember when I started working on caste some 25 years back, I had to kind of make this point that caste still exists, and everyone will say, no, this is your own hangover. You don't need to talk about caste. If you talk about caste, it would obviously begin to exist. No, I don't know whether it is because of that. But the point is that if you look at society around us, it is divided on caste lines. There's a lot of overlap. Anybody working on labor markets would tell you how labor markets are, who ends up where. If you were to look at social mobilities are happening in India. Everyone is mobile. I studied villages of Bihar. 75% of families had at least one person working outside. So it's not like we are not mobile. We are very mobile people. But the destination continues to be shaped largely by the origin. The place where you start will determine where you'll end up, right? And that's where caste accompanies you not only as an identity, but also as a structure of hierarchy, structure of difference, structure of inequality. Not that it happens in every case. Now we have very vibrant Dalit middle class, Dalit rich, OBC middle class. Some OBCs have also become millionaires and billionaires. But this is something that needs engagement, right? So what explains it? Some people can say it is just because of persistence of backwardness, or caste is a state of mind, people are still ignorant, or they'll say, yeah, something have changed, something are still there, eventually everything will change, or they would attribute it to Hindu state of mind. My own sociology, which Ajay was referring to, if you look at this whole modernity tradition kind of thing, continuity and change, it doesn't help us, doesn't take us very far. In reality, again, I would not discuss this in detail. What are the emergent predicaments? Where do we stand today and where do we go? And if you look at, India experience, introduced neoliberal reforms post 1990s, your generation was born after 1990s, and your aspirations are very different, and which in some sense very good. I mean, these aspirations have also made us work harder, right? People who aspire, at least, if they have not studied, their children should go and study in English medium school. That was, Chair was telling, your dean was telling us earlier. So they will work very hard. They will work double shifts, so that they can earn enough fees to send their child to an English medium school. But at the same time, if you look at their destinations, mobility patterns, they at the most end up in a mall working as low-level workers, right? So it is biased in favor of traditional upper castes, and neoliberal capitalism has also made the reservation irrelevant. So there are also caste groups which are getting marginalized. You see Marathas becoming very angry in Maharashtra. Not that there are no problems with Maratha and Dalits, but there are sections of Marathas which are actually experiencing further marginalization and downward mobility. They're asking for reservations. So there are kind of social and economic churnings happening, and democratic political space is the only space that has opened up, and it has in some sense opened up so much that even right-wing politics is forced to accommodate the marginalized in their concerns. That's how they kind of gather their numbers. And it is in this context that one should look at the present caste census. And again, I can go on and on, but I will try to wind up now. So caste-based mobilizations and of its margins have made electoral politics competitive, and they have ended up normalizing caste. Right? We have come to accept caste as a normal reality, which I think is a big achievement of Indian democracy. It's not a negative thing. That like other things are mobilized, caste is not going to stay silent. Instead of thinking of caste as the modernization theorists thought that it would automatically go away, now we have begun to accept the reality of caste, at least political class accept the reality of caste as a normal category, which at some level is a great change in the way Indian elite looks at caste. And the moment you use the word caste, it's not question of identity, it is also a structure of denial, it is also a structure of discrimination and exclusion, and it is also an axis around which disadvantages and privileges are structured. It's not only on the disadvantage which is caste structured, privileges are also caste related to caste. So it is in this context that it has been accepted, reluctantly though, as a policy variable. And that is the point I was trying to make, that Supreme Court judgment on subclassification as well as census will make a lot of difference, right? Inequality tends to be durable when it is linked to identities, race, caste, ethnicity. So India is not unique, right? Wherever you have identities and inequalities connected with each other, then the durable inequality is a word that has come from Western world. Some people like scholars like Pierre Bourdieu are writing about France, and when you look at those writings, you wonder whether they're writing about caste. So these identities are unavoidable baggages or anomalies operationalized and measured through individual economic mobility outcomes. However, ascriptive identities are also potentially agential. Right? As I said, caste has become normal. So one should not look at ascription as a baggage of past, but it is a reality that can also produce political action. And that's how we are seeing the rise of Dalit politics or caste. Politics of today is not politics of going back to caste hierarchy. Caste politics of, particularly coming from Dalits and OBCs, is a politics of citizenship, asking for citizenship. And whenever we talk about ascription, we also thus need to raise whose identity, whose language, to what end. The answer does not lie in identity blinding or either celebrating identities, but in openly engaging with it. And this is where one needs to look at the materialities of caste, right? I'll not talk about it. I've published a paper on it. It's called On the Futures of Caste. It came out in EPW last year. So it has policy implications, and it needs to be kind of recognized as something which is embedded with realities of opportunities, of resources, of relationships. And it is in this context that we need to look at caste as a policy variable. And this is my last slide. There are comparative contexts and value of engaging with caste in policy. Ascription is present in most societies. However, it remains marginal in political discourses due to the hegemonic hold of symbolic liberalism. In India, political discourse actually is mostly structured around caste and community, which itself is a very interesting thing. But the liberal discourse tends to delegitimize it. And I think we need to engage with that discourse much more actively. And it also produces a kind of conceptual message through which we can look at other cultures, other societies. So one needs to rethink inequalities, and this also requires us to thinking about capitalism and class very differently from what it has been done ground up. Thank you very much for listening to me. I'll be very glad to engage if you have any questions.
questions. If you have questions, you can ask. Otherwise, they have exams, sir.
Yeah, you can. Others you want to say, please. Thank you very much for at least pretending to listen to me. I'm so happy that I engage you honestly. It's an achievement for me. So thank you.
Hello, sir. I have a question.
Hello, hello.
Students, you can.
No, before going there, there is a refreshment. Please
Hello, hello.
I can hear you anyway.
Yeah, it's outside here only. Very near.
They have a test which then they get a little rapid.
You have to.
You can have good one.
Thank you. What happened is, Surinder-ji, the Faculty of Humanities has also science in Ascription or Symbiosis. यहाँ एक campus है और एक Yamanagar में है. And students are not all together. And then they have the exams, etc. So,
Working now?
Sorry to sit down.
So you mentioned that India is focusing on being a development state, and it's focusing on its economic growth. So it's do you mean that it's not focusing on its economic development, because growth and development are very different?
Yeah, my problem is not simply in terms of growth and development. Even when you're talking about economic development, your primary concern is economic.
Yeah.
The poor should also become richer. Education reaches everyone. Your primary concern is also still not citizenship. Citizenship might require annihilation of other boundaries that exist between, say, men and women. In the same family, both of you are rich. Your parents earn, say, 5 lakh rupees, 2 lakh rupees per month. But still, if there is discrimination within the family against women, right? That for me is a very significant aspect of absence of citizenship. And that doesn't come simply, that's not your private affair. It is happened because this is a structure which is there in many societies. In Indian society is still there in some sense. Some has changed, but it is still there. So when we are talking about inequality, we should not focus on development. We should not focus only on economy. The word development itself is very problematic. Development is like growing up. There are countries that are developed. We were much more developed than West in the 17th century. So it's not like we need development. We need humanization. Yes, for that we also need food. But we become growth oriented and you have people who have billionaires, who have billions of dollars, and other person who was earlier earning 5,000 rupees, now they're earning 20,000 rupees. They become richer. But that is, actually their life is much worse now with 20,000 rupees because, you know, the whole focus is on middle class, on rich people. Poor people get no drinking water, no proper drinking water. They can be, you know, so their life in some sense, in relative terms, they are much more unhappy than before. So one needs to visualize citizenship as a collective project. It's not individual project, and that has to be done by the state. So that's why I'm saying social policy rather than development.
And you are a student of what? Economics. Of economics. So I have one more question. You said the practice of caste system in India is now more than before. So don't you think the main sole reason for that is a reservation?
It's not more than before.
Yeah.
It's certainly not more than before. I said that caste has changed radically.
Yeah.
From below, from above, from the side. Reservation has helped that change. Now we have much lesser caste system. And one of the reasons it is there is because of reservation. We are compelled to speak on it. Right? We are talking about it. That means reservation has produced a new kind of voice, which is voice of citizenship. So if that was not there, we would have been much more divided people. And this is something that can be empirically proved. Right? So there's no evidence, and the empirical evidence also does not suggest that. Yes, you can have an opinion on reservation. Most people don't like reservation if they don't come close to its beneficiaries. But that's again an ideological position. But again, this question cannot be answered if you just say this, that it's because of reservation. We don't have any empirical evidence. Empirical evidence, if the idea is to annihilate caste, reservation is not something that Dalits want. Ambedkar didn't want reservation. Ambedkar wanted representation so that you could compete equally. In the ultimate analysis, I'm against reservations. When do you require reservation? When there are no jobs. Everyone should get dignified jobs. Everyone should get good quality education. Being a reserved category candidate in any IIT is itself a source of humiliation. Because we are such a casteist society. So you need to think about it. All of us need to think about it. I don't come from reserved category myself, right? But this produces a culture of violence. So one should not frame this question like this. I mean, as I would frame it differently. As a policy variable, has it achieved its results? The answer is yes, and the answer is no. Right? So there are lots of things that need to be done in private sector with no reservation. But why has it been implemented? Why has it been extended to OBC? For me, that is a very important question. And that is because political society has become very, very active. There is no choice. The elite would not want a reservation, but IITs in 1970s up to 1970s, in 1980s, early 80s had no reservation. But now they have to introduce it.
Yeah, sir. Thank you for the lecture. So there's a very good quote by Gandhi, and this was during the deliberation he had with Dr. B.R. Ambedkar when he asked for separate electorates. The question was that we don't want to give you separate electorates because if we give that for Dalits, as an example, we would be separating them from the mainstream. And instead, they came up with the idea of reservations, and the Pune Pact and everything followed. So that is sort of bringing them into the mainstream. But it's, of my opinion, it might be a little bit different as compared to everybody's. If we engage with caste and policy, we are essentially creating a virtual ghettoization of all the social groups, and we're just dividing it further. I mean,
very good question. Yeah. See, first point is that this proposal of reservation was Gandhi's proposal. Ambedkar wanted separate electorates. This was the compromise, right? So Ambedkar was not particularly keen on having reservation. This was political reservation, right? The second point is, so separation, as far as question of separation is concerned, the problem is not that we are separating them. The problem is that separation exists. How do we integrate them? The point is that in absence of effective engagement with caste question, we are reinforcing, producing those ghettos of marginalization. So that's why I started with the question of annihilation. So the idea is to produce citizens so that everyone sees themselves as equal to the other. So in order to do that, that is precisely the point I'm making. That in order to do that, we need to actively confront realities of caste and dismantle them. Not give people reservation, not encourage identity politics. That creates ghettos. You're absolutely right. But who is responsible for that? The one who is ghettoized? Precisely. I mean, even those who are not doing, people, you and me are not doing it, but we are party to that system. We live with our privileges, right? We get our domestic labor very cheap. You go abroad, no one will come to work in your house. You'll have to sweep in your room because they demand equal wages. So the point is that our culture, our society, our education system is structured around that value of hierarchy, value of inequality. We accept it so easily. No democratic society should accept it. So annihilating this ascription-based hierarchy becomes a responsibility for those who are in position of privilege, not those who are in position of marginality. Now it is those who are in position of marginality, they are trying to push for it, which is a good thing. That's why we are talking about it today. But again, we are all the time resisting. We are trying to find excuses and trying to put the burden on the victim.
You are graduate student?
Yes.
Undergraduate.
Second.
So very important questions. The thing is that you're going to always be critical of concepts which do are the development, reservations. That is very, very important. Oh, yeah. Your question was also very, very Gandhi was not interested in isolation from the mainstream. I think you got a you've got to go into detail on the debates between Ambedkar and Gandhi. Ambedkar didn't think highly of Gandhi at all. Okay, in fact, he doesn't believe in thinking. He was talking about isolation from Hindu society. Okay, and Ambedkar also was not too fond of what now being Hindu is very, very fashionable. But so I think you've got to get these things. Development is also destruction. I think few years back, a decade back in EPW, Bernard de Mello wrote an article, or it was a sub-editorial of development as destruction. Okay, there's another Marxist economist who's also talked about it. The great gurus of development were Joseph Stalin, who was known to be a mass murderer, and also Mao also, okay, and also Hitler also. So we should learn to use these concepts which are coming from the top, development, very, very critical. It should be humanization. There's something else which, there's a thinker called J.P. Naik, because he was from Pune, and he's very, very undervalued. Okay. And I think one of the greatest thinkers and one of the great institution makers. He got an ICSR award. He was the founder of the ICSR, also the founder of the Institute. For a decade I was. To have the annihilation of caste, or therefore to have a democratic, truly democratic society, okay, you have to have a common schooling system. Unfortunately, our entire policy, state policy, etc., is absolutely and unconditionally colonial. He has written a lot on colonialism and being very careful about colonial categories. A big edited book in which they also talked about. And so we do not know the disaster which colonialism has done. In Shashi Tharoor, because he's very popular, I'm quoting him, which is, so Shashi Tharoor in his era of darkness is saying that, we didn't become industrialization because you threw us under the bus. I'm quoting him. All our policies right now, unfortunately, and there is a whole, now you're talking about, Nehru Gandhi on one side, and now you've got Savarkar and the post-Nehruvians on the other side. It's not that. It's a linear process which starts off with 1857. You have one in which there's a bloody uprising. Immediately next year, there is a compromise. Queen Victoria comes, puts this thing, and we have the Queen's proclamation. So you're talking about good governance. In fact, good governance, which just now government is talking about, is Queen Victoria's term. And then we have got the exact policies. You're talking about separate electorates. The Muslim League, etc., was disastrous. Ambedkar was not also for this. He was talking about separating out the untouchables out from the monopolistic part of the caste oligarch. You got to use concepts very, very carefully. So you got the caste oligarch who's ruling them through untouchability, okay? And it's the bayonet of the ideology of Brahminism, okay, which is also patriarchal, and to move it out. So see separately. But right now also all our policies are absolutely and unconditionally colonial. They are not indigenous. Jean-Paul Sartre also said that we had to break free and had to become socialist. Slightly linked also to the international capitalist market will make us back into the part of it. So abhi bhi hum Angrez ke hi gulam ho, which is over there. And reservation anyway was not Ambedkar's. It was actually equality, is fighting for equality. And he was also a labor activist, and he was a socialist, by the way. So you read his State and Minorities, okay, which is talking about, in fact, the making of the constitution also issues economic democracy. He's talked about social democracy. So there's political democracy, there is social democracy, there's also economic democracy. So this is the part of it. And this reservation, non-reservation is a trap which the elites have trapped us all into. Okay, fight amongst yourselves. Go, go, go. Dhangar ka hoga, Maratha ka hoga. There is no caste called Maratha, by the way. It's a category. It's a phantasmagoria created by the British, and now it is being consumed. Okay. And so this is the part. Be very, very critical of the concepts, but both your questions are very good. Thanks.
Hello. Yeah, thank you, sir. It is a wonderful lecture, and it is again good to go again because I did my PhD on intergenerational, occupational, and educational mobility among the different socio-religious groups of India. So, I just, as a student, I want to learn from you that you have given a remark that this development of sub-classification is positive because I have written on that and my post went viral against the subclassification, that how it violates the reasonable classification criteria of the Indian Constitution, that it should be based on intelligible differentia and the regional classification, that intelligible differentiation should have, a relation with the objective. So it violates that part. And the second thing is that, there is a, I am skeptical about that. The moment the subclassification would come, it would increase the cases of the NFS, not found suitable, the Ghotala is going, right? So as a student still, these are my views, and I want to learn from you. Second, that, I teach growth to the students, and Robert Solow has asked a fundamental question: why some countries are rich and why some countries are poor? And over and again, after my reading, I have arrived on this conclusion that why we are not innovative, it has something to do with the caste as well. And so I want to learn on from you the innovation and its relation with the caste. Thank you, sir.
I disagree with you on your second question. I think that's an observation. One will have to work on it. It's kind of caste itself is an innovation, right? So one will have to work on it conceptually and empirically. We can make this statement, but does it really mean anything? It's also racism, it's also global inequality. Innovation still happens. So I'm not somebody who would buy or engage with this kind of sloganeering, right? So when does caste become caste, right? These are I think easy formulations to attract people that this is innovation happens, it doesn't happen. Innovation happens because there are resources. And now we all think industrial revolution happened in Britain, but now lots of work on history of science suggesting that the entire global science was feeding into global scientific imagination, right? That breakthroughs come at a particular time. Innovations are monopolized by the US, but they are happening all over the world. Scientific innovation, even medical drugs, they get patented there. But the research happens here in Pune University and ISA and every other place, and all that gets accumulated. So there is a global structure of scientific publication and who controls it and who is able to actually read those journals and produce certain kind of final invention. So innovation is no longer an individual enterprise. I think the very idea of innovation has now become so corporatized, so capitalistic that it can hardly happen. There could be one occasional scientist who patents one thing and becomes billionaire overnight. But his becoming billionaire would also be making a drug company multi-billionaire just because of one invention. Right? So yeah, so this is a kind of tricky game. It's not as simple as we are kind of, we grow up with there is innovation will happen. There should be Tyrian kind of innovation and creativity. Your first question is actually more difficult to answer. I agree with you. Not only the question of NFS, the political weight of Dalits will also decline. Right? The moment you subclassify them, it's because of their numbers that their voices get heard. But a moment comes when, if the state has an honest political will, underlining the word honest political will, it should engage with the realities of reservation on the basis of numbers. No policy should be identity driven. Policy should always be data driven. If the evidence suggests, and this is my own empirical work in case of Punjab, there were 105 civil servants coming from reserved category. Out of those 105, 102 belong to one category. And the other category is 60% of the Dalit population. So how do you deal with that situation? And this is something that has come from below. It is not my suggestion. Subclassification demand has come from within the SC communities. They are already divided. So in case of Andhra Pradesh, where it was happened earlier in Punjab, but Mala Madhika thing was a real thing. It's not something that is imagined and superimposed to divide the youth. So state needs to engage with it. If you're dealing with honestly, then none of this would come. NFS comes up because of that. You can always work it out. My own solution to subclassification is that you don't subclassify on every line. Say, for example, somebody who is a rickshaw puller or an agricultural laborer, even if he has a competent son or daughter, they are unlikely to be able to send her to IIT because sustaining there in IIT is very difficult. But there are certain positions for which subclassification or reservation is possible, where they don't require those things, so that others. So what is happening now? The ladder is broken. Earlier there was a stepping stone. You go to one step, second step, third step. So if you look at the Dalit middle class, and if you look at last 20 years entry into Dalit middle class, and this is where that's why we need data. That's why caste census needs to be looked at along with that. So every individual households need to be enumerated for 5 generations. So this enumeration, not just listing caste. And you look at the community pattern, it's possible now. So much of data technology. Very easily you can look at community pattern of last 5 like 5 generations, the family has moved out of certain systems. For certain kind of jobs, those can be delivered. So there are lots of things that need to be done with data actively at the state level. It should not be done at the national level. Every state has its own structure of class hierarchy. The problem is that there is no honest engagement. Even the Dalit elite doesn't want to engage with it honestly because it's obviously there are inequalities within the Dalit spectrum as well, and we need to raise those. The idea is not to produce an effective Dalit identity. The idea is to alleviate caste. That is my position.
Hello. Hello, sir. I have a question. Utkarsha, yeah. Can I see? Yeah. So, we talk about the issues. So we also have, I want an, what will be the conclusion and what will be the result on this, what we'll do in the further. And the second thing, every new generation is asking about the reservations. And I think even their parents need the guidance on that, because even we are teaching in the schools and colleges, but they go home and again the parent teachers, they teach us some another thing, they guide something, misguide them, and students only listen their parents only. So I think both need the guidance on that and clearance on that, why the reservation is there. Second thing, I don't think that we have an equal distribution about the opportunities and also about the finances. I think because in India, I just recently went to UK and I see the people, only the Gujarati Marwadis are there. Even lots of Punjabi was there, but Punjabi has, I think, I am not identifying anything over here, but I seen they're working in the small, small, occupations, yeah. And while Gujarati and Marwadis are very the richest over there, and they were in the setting, and then they're doing business over there in the UK. So I find out that I'm the only minority over there, and lots of, even they are less in the India, or we can say, but they're more in over there. They're rich over there also, not even in India. We think that they're rich in the globally. So I felt that the energy or the finances they have, only they have. And in about politics also, we can see only the particular person have the community, or the person have that the power, but rest of that doesn't have the finances and the politics also. The three things I have to say. Thank you.
I actually want to add something to the same line. Like, it's really become difficult to be a secular teacher in classes. Yeah, it's really become difficult. Like to talk about caste in class, to talk about even like minority rights. Even like it's getting really difficult to talk about Gaza. Like how do you see the way ahead? Because like I happen to teach at school and colleges, and I find it difficult. Like the moment you say something, the next day, like someone like parents or something, someone would come up and say, "Oh, so you don't have to teach this," and I find it like, "Oh my god!" But then you have to argue like constantly. So, is there any way ahead in how to tackle such situations? Like
Some level, it's also very disturbing. It reinforces the point that we were making, that how at some level the power of caste system has come back, and in some context it's become much stronger than before. And it's because of the new monopolization which privatization has brought in. So I think one should recognize that, and it is actually very scary that we can't talk about obvious inequality So the political system has opened up, but the cultural realities are becoming much more segregated or caste-like, or this division between elite and privilege on one side and the margins on the other side. The elite doesn't want to question. So that is a big question that is challenge for us. How do we reframe the question so that we can engage with it? It's not sustainable. Those kinds of monopolies and those kinds of gateways of privilege. I know this movement is encouraging that, but if we actually serious about it, we need to frame these as critical questions of our time.
I have a question. In the past, we had a lot of social reformers. Is that trend really missing today? What is the one big social reform that you're looking for now, and what should that be? In fact, it's a point for deliberation. Because very often we live in our own little, cave, isolated, because in our individual capacities, we've not faced these kind of discriminations and inequalities, all right? But then we don't teach it. Or if we teach it, it's economic inequalities, for example, whether it is income, consumption, wealth. But I like that one word that I take away from your talk today. Development is really humanization. And that's something that, and you talk about development even being destructive. So there's no doubt about that. But I think is social reforms really absent?
I think that's a very important question. I think I would use the word reform very slightly differently. I think you're referring to the 19th century. In that also there were two elements of it. One was focusing directly on political process. Right? These were not really social reform, they were talking about political revolution. Like Ambedkar would use the word social reform to be brought about first before the independence. But he's talking about a political process. And there were other reformers who were talking about, say, Jawaharlal type. So I think it's the first type that we need, that the point that you are making, the other point, that how there has been a kind of, I use the word ghettoization, right? We talk about cave, but there is a ghettoization or insulation of middle class and elite from the realities of society. And this is, in some sense, being quote unquote naturalized. So middle class people, they are living in a locality which is bounded. It is actually boundary wall and the security guard. What are they called?
Gated
communities. Yeah. So there's a gate, and inside gate is your own world, right? And I think that at some level, the younger generation, many of the young kids are stopping. They have the ability to be not critical because they don't see those differences as violence. They see them as their entitlements. They have to be a guard. So the moment they are born, they're confronted with those hierarchies, and they get naturalized. They go to school. Their classmates are of similar nature. Right? They all come from similar kind of classes. They have similar kind of birthday parties. I think that is not sustainable. That's the point I was trying to make. And yes, we need some kind of social politics, which is not simply political politics, which you would call as reform. Yeah, sure.
And we just small. Yeah. So I'll ask the question first. Okay. The question was like this, is that just purely on a, let us say, philosophical level, and we have to talk philosophy also. So when we welcome subcategorization and all this, and political mobilization around caste, but let's say purely on a philosophical or theoretical level, uh, how does caste disappear? When the flag, I put the flag and I am going to benefit, that's why I'm putting it. And I am never going to leave something that benefits me, and the benefits are material and also psychological. After all, caste is also a feeling of it has comforts. Yeah. So finally, how does this? What is how? I mean, what is the theoretical model for its dissolution? That was one. And if I can just bring the second question also, is that uh, instead of to go by the good old Marxist way and rediscover, let us say, Marx or take him forward, isn't it much better to talk instead of focusing solely on caste, on the way capitalism works and to expose the fact that it is not at all a fair or equal system? Yeah, and there you are dealing with solid data, and you are dealing with something that everybody is willing to talk about. So it gives you space also. For example, it gives you space. I am not talking about caste. I'm talking about how the market is working. I'm talking about market wages and all, and then I can slip in caste and so many other things. So maybe, and the reality seems to be that except for a few places here and there, a systematic study of how capitalism is affecting our lives is missing for the last so many years. So these are just two. The first one, if you can.
Second question, I completely agree with you. And if you look at my work in the last 20 years, this is precisely what I've done. I don't engage with Marzmanga, like Karl Marx. I don't, I mean, of course, one needs conceptualization, one needs to. My argument is that if you work on caste vigorously, produce concepts, and with these concepts, you can revisit development of capitalism. That's the last slide I was trying to argue. In Europe as well, this chap person who's worked with Pure is actually used my concept of caste as institutionalized humiliation for study of race and capitalism in US, published a new book on race in US. So I'm very happy about that. Yes, that's what we need to do. That caste is a reality and it kind of is structured and processed through capitalism and vice versa. And that's what we were in some sense talking yesterday also. Caste as a process of capitalism. Capitalism also as a process of caste. Right? So you cannot have a universal theory of anything. It all has to be conceptual, contextual. And then from context, you develop new conceptual categories with which you can do comparative work. So that would be absolutely the way you were saying. One needs to be empirical. Marx himself, moved away from philosophy, said one needs to be empirical. But I'm not a kind of, devout follower of Marx or anything, or anyone for that matter, right? The first question is, I have thought about it, and see, there are two options. One is caste blinding. Right? Historically, if you look at the Japanese experience with Rakumen, right? Rakumen were untouchables of Japan. They still are at some level. Right? So their policy was, I think, in 1960s or something, they decided not to enumerate them, not to identify them. So there's no data available. So nation state doesn't know about Rakumen. Word doesn't exist anywhere in the national vocabulary, in the civic vocabulary. So that is one way to completely not talk about caste. Right? So is that the right policy? I would say no. Right? That would depoliticize the whole question of policy and caste, obviously, and that's what is neoliberal capitalism is doing that. You've not talked about caste and my own work on corporate hiring. So keep emphasizing that we have nothing to do with caste. This space is caste neutral. That itself is a problematic thing. And then when you actually talk to them after 5 minutes, everything that they're speaking is about caste exclusion. So the second that I am proposing is that somebody has to confront the realities of caste. How do you confront the realities of caste? First of all, you need to recognize the structure of exclusion and discrimination. These are ascription-based identities which produce citizenship deficits. And if that is the case, then we need to engage with it actively all the time at all levels. And it is possible through direct state policies. There's no other agency that can be as effective as a state. You can say they can movements from within. Within movements would be, again, vested interests will take care of them, and They would all talk about themselves and not talk about others, unless there are some Mahatmas and reformists. But then who will accept the Mahatma? Mahatma himself can become a problem because Mahatma will want to recognize the Mahatma in everyone, and that itself becomes a problem. So if it has to be political, then the final agency is state, and the state confronts the realities of caste empirically, as you were saying earlier. At every moment, we need to empirically engage with realities, and then you have a punishment for it. So we had this proposal that sometime we were talking about it during earlier UPA period that we need to have what are those called commissions, equal opportunity commission. Yeah. So the moment you find somebody is discriminated against on identity, companies should be punished, officers should be punished. It doesn't come. The SCs want their SC commission and not equal opportunity commission. So equal opportunity commission has to be very, very powerful, very effective, and it is possible in all state countries. So the objective end result has to be annihilation, not consolidation of identities of certain specific caste groups. So that's what is happening in Maharashtra. My superficial understanding to my colleagues that lots of this mobile middle class talents, they have their own associations and they are aligned with whosoever is in power. Because they want funding, they want legitimacy, they want resources, and they're happy with whosoever is in power, whether they are right wing or left wing or police or yeah.
Let that be the last question. We are working on this subjects like honor crime, caste atrocities, and budgets for SC/STs. So when we are dealing with and they're like, yeah, as you rightly pointed, caste, we understand when we are engaging with the system, like people are still suffering from all these cases and all. I just want to need your guidance when we are working on this, we are working on SC/ST budget, and we are trying to interact with the government for the policy, there is a SC/ST budget, and we want as a legislation, but we are struggling on it from more than 5 years for getting it as an act. But it's very difficult to deal with the government on this sensitive questions. Even the getting compensation for atrocities and severe deaths, it's very difficult. So can you please guide, when we are working on these issues, how should our organization, how we should strategize our work? And also there are various limitations, if we look at caste is not recognized by even the CSR NGOs and all. Many NGOs are looking for the charity purpose, are doing work like that only, to be frank. So no one is focusedly working on a caste as an issue. And and therefore even the FCR rules are also help it's very difficult to work for right right-based NGOs to work in this era. So can you please guide how we should work on resources and also and to work for these issues? Yeah. Thank you.
Absolutely, this person. You know much better. Your context will decide. Just keep doing what you're doing. That's what I'll say. Keep reflecting. Keep talking. Keep familiar with that context. So this doesn't happen in one day. This doesn't happen with some kind of expert advice.
Hello. Sir, I have one question. Last question. So, sorry. We are talking about Ambedkar and annihilation of caste. So, I want to understand from your point of view as a sociologist, the Ambedkar gave some kind of suggestion, in annihilation of caste, how we can annihilate the caste, and he gave some ways through which we can think about that. But in contemporary time, in current time, the situation is different, and it has become complex also. Towards whom we can look for analysis of the caste. Within the Dalits also, that's the situation have become very much complex. Within the Dalits, there is a hierarchy also. Means how we can through these challenges, like within Dalits also, there are the hierarchy, how we can accept, how we can assume about the annihilation of caste? And as a sociologist also, what are your views? What are your take? Like what you thought about that? Ki how the dilemma and the perception the upper caste is having. So so how they can came out from that dilemma, and how the Dalit can do basically something. So as a sociologist, what is your take?
Yeah, I mean, as a sociologist, I would say just do sociology. That's what I've been doing, right? I mean, that's what you're asking for. We don't need Mahatmas. Mahatmas don't take us very far, and Mahatmas have a lifetime and then they die, right? So we need wisdom, we need some knowledge, and that knowledge has to be created. I mean, that's why we read Ambedkar, because Ambedkar wrote about those realities in a particular manner. We debate them. We should continue to debate them. But that also, that's what he was suggesting, that we need a lot of empirical work. Every region, every context, times have changed. That's why we are talking about it. But we still need to talk about annihilation. My argument is that in light of all this, I have done a lot of work. I mean, a lot of this has been when I was talking about changing caste. It's already been, I mean, not only me, there are hundreds of other scholars who have been working on it. So we have a lot of empirical data. On that basis, this argument is going on, whether to have subclassification or not. Census data is also one way of expanding that database so that we figure out where their caste is. There are some areas caste prejudice has gone away. Like with new kind of food cultures, you have Zomatos. There are different ways in which it's coming up, but it's much lesser. Who is cooking your food? How do you know? If you're so kind of dependent on the sky kitchen, the sky kitchen is anonymous, right? So food untouchability has become much lesser, but it is a huge revolution. Why do you think that's not change? Right? So likewise, distillery water and many other. So we need to revisit. The fact that caste exists doesn't mean that it has become much worse than before. The fact is that it is still present and it is still being felt by people as a source of humiliation. Unless it is a source of humiliation, it doesn't matter to me. Right? You and I are different. You and your brothers or sister would also be different. Right? I've seen in one family, one person is fair skin, the other person is dark skin. They're not problem, but there is problem with this dark skin outside because we have this value of, valuing fair skin. So that is where the problem lies, right? So I think one needs to, the world has changed. That's why we're talking about new urbanization, new forms of exclusion, which overlap with caste. Right? He was talking about, if you want to buy a house, they're not going to give you a house just because you have money in your pocket. They look at you, upar se niche tak, and then they'll say that, okay, come tomorrow. Yeah.
I can take some idea from your talk. So we have to explore the materiality of caste. Yeah, typically engaging with the materiality of not materiality, practical materiality. So that you will answer this side. But we are doing that also. Yes. Not that we are not doing it. So answer this question. Your talk.
Okay. Thank you, sir, for your thoughtful, unprovoking, and enlightening speech. I request Professor Ajay sir to present a memento and book as a token of our gratitude. Mujban Zal sir, if he wants to comment on that talk, so we can. Okay.
Thank you so much.
Murjavan sir.
Very much. Now the vote of thanks has been given to me. I will speak a little bit.
You can summarize.
Yeah, I'll be summarizing it. I know Surinder since 1982. First time I saw it was outside the Sociology department at Pune University. And right now also he's in the entrance and the boundary line of Sociology, obviously now international. We were also students in the Punjab University together. I learned a lot of, I'm a philosophy person, but I learned a lot of empirical sociology from him when we were in Haryana. I remember we were in Haryana. Okay, there are a number of important points over here, which I'll summarize. The question of nation state, which comes up, and the importance of the nation state. I think somewhere else quite recently, Akhil Vilkarami had also talked about nation state, along which comes this parliamentary democracy and constitutional democracy. There is the underbelly is not talked about at all. People are right now talking about the civilizational state. It is coming out from the right-wing ethno-nationalist, which is an extremely dangerous idea. We are now trying to mirror Israel, which is a civilizational state. What Trump is doing in the US, what Russia Putin is doing. And we have got people, your vice chancellor, by the way, writes a lot on the civilization state. She was here in Pune University. And suddenly Dharma, and then we got a tele-evangelist, NDTV to Times Now, etc., talking about Dharma. They'll not also talk about India, it is Bharat. Now we are, actually being taught what being Indian is. We are not Indians. Okay, Indians was coloniality. Maybe it was Aurangzeb or Tipu Sultan who introduced this word India. So we need to decolonize ourselves. Ascriptive identities. Oh, here it is something which is extremely important. I think this whole lecture was on ascriptive identities. Who are you? Naming is shaming. Who are you is a question that Ambedkar raises. And he quotes Shakespeare also, and he says also that the Romeo and Juliet, the sentence which is call a rose by any other name will smell as sweet, is not exactly the same thing. It is naming is shaming. So ascriptive identities. The question that you are talking about, how does the annihilation of caste take place? For that, we'll also have to know what caste is, because we're using a concept without also knowing that it is a concept. Ambedkar said, caste is a notion. It's into our head. It is in our political, not only political unconscious, it is into our everyday, not only into conscious, it is into our unconscious. We belong to a particular biological breed, okay? And we come out from one species, Surya, so Suryavanshi, and something, so some Vanshi, and we are from different Vanshas. There are three, therefore I'll just summarize by saying this. There are three, in order to know annihilation of caste, you've got to know what is caste itself. And here it is very, very important to understand, to make a difference between this mere caste, which is a colonial construct. His edited book has a lot of it, and he also warns about not using colonial and Orientalist ideas. Mere caste is a typical colonial construction coming out from racist Christian Europe, which came to India not to trade, not to even civilize the barbarians, okay, but came for absolutely imperialistic reason. We are lucky that genocide didn't take place in India, but wherever the good white colonial Christian came, Christian colonial state is a term which is in the last part of Capital Volume 1. Marx's Capital Volume 1. And Marx is also warning us what is the Christian colonial state. I think we need, therefore I'll take up over here, your annihilation of caste will also be, and then what is caste itself? So far when we are using, in fact, the leader of the opposition is also talking about caste, census, etc. It's all colonial. And this is in fact helping the ethno-nationalist, that there is no caste, okay? Or now also they have started using the word caste because of their internal whatever politics. So we've got to understand what therefore is caste. Make a distinction between mere caste and the caste clan system, which emerges out from what I call the Indic variation of the Asiatic mode of production, and taking an extremely disastrous turn with colonialism and the colonial mode of production. So far, I think there's been no engagement of Ambedkar and Ambedkar studies with the colonial mode of production, Hamza Alvi, etc. I think we need to
get this procedure of what is happening to the colonial mode of production. So first make a distinction between mere caste and the caste class system in order to annihilate it. So therefore, there are three levels of caste or caste clan system, not Abbe Dubois, not John Wilson, which are using Christian. So the pagans, okay, the bad Hindus are the ones who have got caste. This is Abbe Dubois, which is sometime in earlier 19th century. And remember, he's a Jesuit. He's a French Jesuit. He's running away from the French Revolution. He comes to South India, and he's the one who's actually theorized with patronage from the East India Company. So the people who are working on so-called the Orientalist construction of caste, which again Surinder has talked about in his books, is a Orientalist, colonial, imperialistic, disastrous idea, which we should not. Unfortunately, as I said a little bit before, our policies come out from the colonial genealogy, don't come out from our own internal, don't come out from Jyotiba Phule, don't come out from Ambedkar. Ambedkar was an absolutely brilliant thinker. There is something which is missing out, which Scott Stroud, in his book, especially in The Evolution of Pragmatism, brings up, is possibly the impact of German classical idealism, especially Hegel, on Ambedkar's. Ambedkar is able to, of Hebung, transcend the colonial construct in order to make it empirically and philosophically validate the idea of caste. But I'm saying that Ambedkar is also talking about a caste clan system. So therefore, when he's talking about enclosed caste class, so therefore it's got an enclosed mind, it's got an enclosed ideological, or when he's talking about warring gangs, he's also talking about that it's an unnatural institution that is beyond reason, it is an irrational system. And again, that ascendancy and descending, that whenever ascendancy you revere them, descending you hate them. So this sort of hatred which is over there. The second part of caste is also a form of racism also. It's not race, but there's a South African, there's a Asian form of, South Asian form of racism also. You hate that person is biologically impure. Okay, so you hate, you kill, and there's also celebration in the killing. So therefore the so-called honor killings or dishonor killings. But there's a third part, taking out from Ambedkar and via Marx and Freud, is that there is also a neurosis, psychosis, and schizophrenia also within the system. Now, how do we annihilate it? We need educationists like Ambedkar, we need people like J.P. Nayak also, and we need a process of collective learning. Otherwise, it's absolutely impossible from this privatized learning because, again, we are recreating our own ghettos, etc. So right now, I think that we are in with these three sort of enclosed classed racism and with schizophrenia, our whole policy making has become schizophrenic. Our caste census is not going to be data driven because he's keeping on saying it should be with good intentions, it should be with a good mind. I think neither in the opposition or neither in the ruling party is any good intentions of doing whatever it is. It is to create their own political capital, which is bent on exploitation and division of the people. Education is cultivation of the mind. This is how Ambedkar had defined education. I think this procedure of collectivization, therefore now I'm bringing J.P. Nayak. Many times I'm bringing, when I'm talking about Marx and I'm talking about Ambedkar, I'm talking about J.P. Nayak also as an educationist. Public schools is completely lost. Our whole system, and another thing is, there is no division between Gandhi and Savarkar, okay, which many secularists are trying to bring in, or between Nehru and the post-Nehruvians also. It is a complete linear development taking place because obviously Nehru was not brazenly communal or casteist, etc. But there's a linear thing because he wanted to stay blind. As he said, development will take place, caste will automatically dissolve. Okay, that's not taken place. It's become more brutal. It's not become more, but it's become more brutal and violent. You can make out what is happening in the last few days. You can create another other. It's now the Muslim who's become the other. Okay, so the Muslim is a termite, he's a foreigner, etc. And we need to have sir and what surveys, etc. to find out who and she is. Again, empirical data, what he was talking about in his, is extremely important in order to construct good theories. and ascriptive identity should be transformed to democratic and humanistic identities. I think this is the culmination of his talk. I'd like to thank him again, and I wish Ajay brings in again, invites Surinder and more such thinkers. Thank you very much.
Yeah. I sincerely thank you, sir, for your thoughtful concluding remark. I request Professor Ajay sir to kindly present a memento and book to sir as a token of gratitude. Okay. So it is a now vote of thanks. So I will just cut short. Heartfelt gratitude to guest speaker Professor Surinder Jodhka sir for delivering an enlightening and thought-provoking lecture on caste and state policy. Your deep insight and critical perspective have helped us understand the complex relationship between caste and governance and the role of policy in shaping social equity. Your lecture not only reflected rigorous scholarship but also inspired us to reflect on Ambedkar's vision of inclusion and just society. I take this opportunity to express my heartfelt gratitude to our co-organizer and guest of honor, Professor Jyoti ma'am, the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences for joining hands to organize this enlightening event. I sincerely thank Professor Murjaban Jal sir for chairing this lecture, for honoring our invitation and guiding lecture proceedings and contributing his thoughtful remarks. My appreciation also goes to the reparators and volunteers for their dedication. Yeah, I again thank to Mrs. Sanjeevani Mujumdar ma'am for for her always encouraging words and motherly hand on us. I would also like to thank our directors, faculty members, stakeholders from the education sectors and our citizens who have come here for this lecture. We are also grateful for the students and attendees for your engaged presence and key questions and thoughtful reflections, which has added a great value to today's discussion. I would like to acknowledge our staff, Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar and museum staff, that is Amit sir, Sachin, Hanumant and Rahulji, for their always extending hands to us. And a special note of thanks to Professor Ajay sir for his direction-based leadership, and my PhD scholars, Dipali and Mona Lisa, for their unwavering supports. Finally, we acknowledge everyone who contributed directly and indirectly to the success of this event. Your support and strengths our commitment to continue the dialogue on social justice, equality, and policy reform in the line of Dr. Ambedkar's enduring legacy. Thank you. Yeah.